Guten Tag. So today we're going to have a look at the past tense. Now, the past tense to me is the most important tense, simply because research has indicated that we use the past tense something like 50 to 60% of the time when we speak, the present tense about 30 to 40%, and the future tense about 5 to 10%. So the past tense is the stuff that we really use most of all. And perhaps not too surprisingly, in German, the past tense is the most difficult of the tenses. Your future tense is the easiest. All right. Your present tense is medium. It's got a lot of irregular verbs. It's got a lot of irregular conjugations, as I've said in the present tense video. But it's sort of okay-ish in comparison to the past tense. The past tense in German, there are three versions, which is you have your perfect tense, you have your imperfect tense, and you have your Plusquamperfekt. All right, the imperfect tense being, in English, you would call it, I think, the simple past tense. I went, I ate, I slept. And basically, as far as I'm concerned, as far as possible, what we should do is we should basically use the perfect tense, then potentially use some of the imperfect, depending on whether you're doing sneaky German or survival German, and scrap the Plusquamperfekt completely, because you can basically use cues to say that you did this before you did that. You don't need a whole tense for it. Yeah, please. So let's do it one thing at a time. So for sneaky German, the idea, if you remember for sneaky German, or if you haven't listened to any of my videos before, the idea for sneaky German is that it is my belief that you can take away 20% of the German grammar, basically 20, maybe even 25%, and you can still communicate. If your other 75% of the grammar are on form, on point, you can communicate with any German person in such a way that they believe that you know great standard German, Hochdeutsch. Your Hochdeutsch is great, right? They will not go, yeah, you seem to be good at that particular past tense, but what did you do with the other 1.5 or 1 3/4 past tenses? Where are those? They won't even spot it, because the conversational past tense is the perfect tense. And even if you write simple things like instructions or essays or something, you can usually, unless you write at an academic level, or you're writing a novel or something, the next great German novel or something, then you will need everything. Anyway, so in sneaky German, what we do, we chuck away the Plusquamperfekt, and of the simple past tense, we keep only 9 verbs. We keep sein, haben, werden, and the modal verbs, können, müssen, sollen, dürfen, etc., wollen, whatever. Right, why do we do that? Because it's just, you can say, I have had a headache. You can say that. Yesterday I have had a headache all day long. But it's just a lot easier to say, yesterday I had a headache all day long. And even my beloved Afrikaans kind of acknowledges that, because usually in Afrikaans there is one past tense. What a surprise. Love it. And there is one auxiliary verb, ek het geëet, ek het geslaap, ek het gegaan. Fantastic. But there are a few things. For example, so you have things like ek was siek, ek was moeg, and the modal verbs also are not used. You don't use het for the modal verbs either. It just is more elegant. And for sneaky German, you have to learn the perfect tense perfectly. And you learn the conjugation of those 9 verbs in the simple past tense, and then you chuck the rest of it. And then you can get away with people believing that your German is great, right? For survival German, you go further. You chuck the whole simple past tense. You chuck the whole of the Plusquamperfekt, and you simplify the perfect tense tremendously. Now, the perfect tense. Okay, let's get into this. The perfect tense in standard German, in English and in Afrikaans, you have one auxiliary verb. I have eaten, ek het geëet. In German, for whatever unfathomable reason, you have 2 auxiliary verbs. Right? I always visualize that once upon a time there was a meeting of professors at Heidelberg University 200 years ago or something, and they all sat around a big round table and they all discussed what they were going to formalize into the German language. And they all obviously spoke perfect German already. They didn't need to learn perfect German. They already spoke perfect German. This was not something that they had to do. They already had that. And so whenever there was a question coming up, whether it was now for auxiliary verbs, somebody would say, well, we use haben. We use haben for everything. And somebody would say, no, but I mean, we also have Sane. So, yeah, and then there was a little bit of an argument, and then the chairperson would say, no, gentlemen, relax. We can use both. They did exactly the same thing when it came, for example, to the form of possibility. In English, normal people say, if it rains tomorrow, I need an umbrella. If you're very well educated, you would say, I say, if it were to rain tomorrow, I would need an umbrella. Fantastic. In German, wenn es morgen regnen würde ich einen Regenschirm brauchen. Cool. But then another professor chirps up and says, yeah, but what about that wonderful form of, wenn es morgen regnete, bräuchte ich einen Regenschirm. What are we going to do about that? And the chairperson again says, don't worry about it, we just put both in. Chuck it all into a shopping cart, it's fine. Right? And that's the problem here. The problem is that the language was not constructed for the learner. I mean, I'm all about my students. I don't care about the formality of the language. I could care less. I care about producing results for the people that I teach, right? But they obviously, right down the line, you have people who are more interested in creating big, elaborate constructions which please them, given that they already spoke the language, and they could not have cared less about the problems they were causing for people trying to learn it. It was of no interest to them, right? Anyway, so there we are. So basically, it starts off that in the perfect tense, you have two auxiliary verbs. You have haben and you have sein, right? Now then you have rules, of course, because you need to have, you have patterns and you have rules for the patterns. So you use haben for everything, except for if there's a change of position or a change of condition. All right. So a change of position means kommen, gehen, fahren, anything that where at the end of the sentence you're probably somewhere else than you were at the beginning of the sentence. You drove into town, you flew to Germany, whatever it is, right? Those all use the auxiliary verb sein, right? So ich bin nach Deutschland geflogen, right? Der Pilot ist von Berlin nach Hamburg geflogen, right? For argument's sake. Oder von Hamburg nach Berlin, whichever. Right? Because at the end they were in a different position. Of course, then there are exceptions, such as if you put the pilot into an airplane, then it becomes der Pilot hat das Flugzeug von Hamburg nach Berlin geflogen oder von Berlin nach Hamburg. Right? Why? Because, there's some explanation, but exceptions. Basically boils down to exceptions. Right? So you have a change of position, and then you have a change of condition. So whilst if you're talking about somebody sleeping through the night, you would say, ich habe gestern Nacht gut geschlafen, habe geschlafen, right? But if you fall asleep late, ich bin eingeschlafen. Why? Because change of state. You were awake, then you fell asleep, right? So those are two things, change of position and change of condition. But hold on a moment, there are exceptions. Yes, there are always exceptions. In German, there are always exceptions. So you have single verbs floating around like bleiben and werden, which also use the auxiliary verb sein, although there is no conceivable reason why they specifically would. But there you are, exceptions. Right, so anyway, so your thing, your problem to a certain extent is when you have a sentence in your head that you are, as you would, translating from your language into German, you have a whole series of questions that you have to run through. So the first question is, which auxiliary verb am I using? Am I using haben or sein? So you've got to settle on that. That's question one. Question two, what do I conjugate that auxiliary verb to make it conform to the subject of the sentence? Which is I, you, he, she, it, etc., we, whatever. Right? Then you've got to conjugate the haben or sein. Then you move the actual activity towards the end of the sentence. Ich habe gestern Nacht gut geschlafen. End of the sentence. Then, number three, you use a participle, ge, geschlafen. Except there are two exceptions. There are always exceptions. If it's an inseparable verb, so for example, let's say you use suchen to search. I searched for my keys. Ich habe meine Schlüssel gesucht. But now let's say you use suchen, but you have a similar, you have an inseparable verb called like besuchen, to visit, right? So I visited my grandmother is not, ich habe meine Großmutter gebesucht. It's just, ich habe meine Großmutter besucht. Why? Who knows? Similarly, any verb ending in I-E-R-E-N, like studieren, telefonieren, fotografieren, reparieren, etc., all those ones also don't take a participle. So you would say, ich habe für die Prüfung studiert, not ich habe für die Prüfung gestudiert. But so your third question is, am I using GE or not? If it's a separable verb, the GE gets spliced in the middle. Ich habe den Mann angerufen. Right? So that's your third question. Your fourth and potentially fifth question is you now have to work out, is it a weak verb or is it a strong verb? For which theoretically you need to, and this is a bit of a problem in my sneaky German, theoretically you would need to know the simple past tense, because if it changes, the stem changes, ich gehe, ich ging, right? Ich gehe, ich ging. Stem changes into the simple past tense, which means it's a strong verb because it has the strength to change its stem. So ich bin gegangen, en ending, and ich gehe, G-E-H, ich ging, G-I-N, bin gegangen, G-E-G-A. So you have three different vowels, right? Don't even get me started. Where was I? Oh, yes. So you have to then work out, is it a weak verb or a strong verb? Because if it's a weak verb, it's reasonably easy. You put on the participle at the front, you drop the en of the infinitive, and you put a t in, like spielen, to play. Ich spiele, simple past tense, ich spielte, and then ich habe gespielt. So that's reasonably easy. If it's a strong verb, you put an en ending, but the middle part can be completely different from either the present tense or the simple past tense. So you have to learn the whole thing. Potentially this is a problem for sneaky German, except that I've got a hack for it using the English language. But that in its own time when we get to it. As per usual, yes, I know the pace at which I go through this and through the explanation is fairly fast, but I do include a PDF which explains all of this, which you can download, which you can click. It's stored on my Google Drive, so you can get it from there. So for sneaky German, you don't get around it. You've got to do the 5 steps. You've got to go, answer your 4 or 5 questions, and you've got to learn to put all that together. Because otherwise, you get, it is obvious that you're not speaking German. You're not speaking standard German. And the idea behind being sneaky is that you do something without people realizing that you're doing it. Otherwise, it's not sneaky. It's just whatever. Okay, for survival German, we make life really, really easy because we only use one auxiliary verb, haben. That's it. No sein. Forget about sein. As in English and as in Afrikaans, we use haben. And the fact that you use haben and that you conjugate it, now you conjugate it according to survival German rules, which means ich habe, du habe, er, sie, es habe. Wir haben, ihr haben, sie haben. Okay, that solves that one. You use a participle for everything. So, ich habe für die Prüfung gestudieren. So you use a participle. Don't worry about those 2 exceptions. Just use a participle anyway. And then what you put on is the infinitive. Because if you use the infinitive, a German person, if you say, ich habe für die Prüfung gestudieren, there are 3 mistakes there, right? It should be studiert. So there's a mistake in the wrong, you have the right auxiliary verb, it would be the right auxiliary verb, but you're conjugating it wrong, right? Well, actually you're not, ich habe. No, you're actually conjugating it right. Coincidentally, du habe. So you conjugate, du habe, you studied. So that would be a mistake. And then ge is a mistake. And then instead of studiert, it's studieren is a 3rd mistake. But because you're using an auxiliary verb, haben, and because you're using the infinitive, which is easily recognizable, a German person will understand what you're saying. 100% guaranteed. If you say to somebody, ich habe für die Prüfung gestudieren, they'll get it's the perfect tense. So this happened in the past, and what you did, you studied. They will get that. And that, after all, is the main idea here. Like I said, your survival German, in terms of the verb tenses, reducing the verb tenses as I have present, past, and perfect tense, present, past, and future tense, those reductions basically simplify it down to maybe 10 or 15%. not just what I say to people, which is it makes the survival German as a quarter as difficult, 25% as difficult, or takes 25% of the time of learning standard German. But there are areas in the language where you have to actually, and we use a lot of sentences, more sentences than just learning words. Because using sentences, I got that from a gentleman called Michelle Thomas, awesome, phenomenal language teacher, Polyglot Institute. Anyway, other time, other place. Use sentences. You use sentences and you stack the sentences. A baby, when it lies there and hears its parents talk, the parents will talk one sentence about something and then another sentence about something completely different, which means you needed quite a lot of time and thousands of sentences for it to slowly drift down and the patterns to take hold. If you take sentences and you vary them, you say, I went to town. I went to town today. I went to town today with a friend. I went to town today with a friend to buy food. And you stack the sentences like that. Then the pattern, because you're stacking the sentence, becomes far faster to learn. But anyway, where was I before I went off there? Lost my train of thought. So there are things in the German language, right, like prepositions. Right, prepositions do not translate. For example, if your original language is English, you can't just translate the English preposition into its German equivalent. Because in English, I heard it on the radio. Right, if you say to a German person, ich habe es auf dem Radio gehört, they go, what? Ich habe es im Radio gehört, yes. We drove into the countryside. Wir sind aufs Land gefahren, onto the countryside. If you say to a German person, we drove into the countryside, they went, you went off the side of a bridge or something and your car into the countryside? Shame. So prepositions, you have to basically take and you have to learn them specifically. So that then again extends the time. That's why I say 25%. But in the verb forms, you can simplify everything in the verb forms and come down to 10-15% of what regular German verb forms will take you in terms of time. And as I said, you can still communicate with it. And that, after all, is the idea. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you very much. Do comments, please. Please comment on this. Positive or negative, I don't mind. Subscribe, and the PDF can be downloaded down below. Thank you. Auf Wiedersehen.